Hey guys, in this video we're going to be creating a really simple e-commerce layout with Tailwind CSS. So we're going to go over a few different things. We're going to go over responsive layouts and responsive design, as well as using colors and transitions. For example, hovering over these buttons here, we have a nice little transition. We're going to go over text, gradients, background images, and normal images. And we're going to create this little makeshift logo as well using Tailwind CSS. So literally everything on this page was created using Tailwind CSS. There's no custom CSS in here. And of course, it's responsive. So we can see in this Mad Bro example e-commerce store, we have categories at the top here. So if we reduce the screen size, we can see that the categories stack at a medium size screen width, and exactly the same for the featured products. We have 3 products in a grid, or 3 columns, or a 3-column layout for large screen sizes. If we take that down to medium screen sizes, we have 2 columns, and down again to small screen sizes, we have 1 column per row. So this is fairly simple to do in Tailwind CSS. So if you're looking for a tutorial that covers doing all of this, but with plain CSS rather than with Tailwind CSS, then I have a tutorial on that as well. I'll put a link in the description below for that tutorial. However, for this tutorial, we're going to be using Tailwind CSS, and the top part here uses CSS flexbox within Tailwind, and this bottom part here with the featured products uses CSS grid within Tailwind. So with that said, let's actually get started then and create some code. So before we actually create some code, we need to install a couple of extensions. So we don't have to install these extensions, but it certainly helps. So the first extension for VS Code is Tailwind CSS Intellisense. So what this extension does is I'll open up the completed project and just give you a quick example. So in index.html, if I just scroll to the top here and add a random div at the top. So if we add class in like this and we hit Control and space, then we have a bunch of Tailwind specific CSS classes that we can use. So for example, if we wanted to use a background of stone, then we have the IntelliSense that pops up here for us. If we wanted a font bold, then we've got the IntelliSense here, as well as the actual CSS that the class name will produce or specifies. So with that said, then let's actually make sure we have Tailwind CSS Intellisense installed. I'm also going to have the live server extension installed as well. It's a little bit flaky when working with Tailwind CSS, I've noticed. However, I'm going to have it installed anyway, and it will allow us to spool up a local development server, and it's a live server, so anytime anything changes in any of our files, then it will automatically reload in the browser. So with that said then, let's create a brand new Tailwind CSS project. So for this, I'm just going to cd into my web projects directory. And from here, I'm just going to follow the setup installation on the Tailwind CSS documentation. So I'm going to make a new directory called Tailwind tutorial. I'm going to cd into Tailwind tutorial. Then I'm going to npx install-d Tailwind CSS. So npx install-d Tailwind CSS. And that should be npm install, not npx. So I'm going to open up the project in VS Code, and I'm going to npm init, and we're just going to keep it all as the defaults. Everything's okay as the defaults. So then from here, we want to npm i-d Tailwind CSS. Then we want to npx Tailwind CSS init. Then let's copy the Tailwind config.js default. So we need to create a new file, tailwind.config.js. And actually that's already there. So we'll just paste the default in there. I'm going to create a prettier RC with a tab width of 2, so it looks a little bit neater there. So then we need to create a source and input.css. Just create a new folder, source, new file called input.css, paste in the input CSS there for Tailwind. Then let's copy the Tailwind CLI build process, and you should notice that it created a dist folder with an output CSS. So in source then we need to create a new file called index.html and copy the example index.html, and notice it's referencing this output.css. So Tailwind isn't just a bunch of CSS classes. We can use Tailwind to generate CSS classes as well. So Tailwind, once it generates those CSS classes, it will output it to the output.css, which we can then use in our project. So there's a bit of building going on behind the scenes to actually build out a couple of these CSS or Tailwind CSS classes. But once it's built out, we just need to reference the outputted CSS file here in our index.html. So from here then, I'm going to add a nicer font. So I've already got it selected in copied in my clipboard there. I'm using the Google font Roboto Slab. So to reference this Google font then in Tailwind CSS and make sure that this Roboto Slab font is being applied, all we need to do is go to tailwind.config.js, and in theme, we can add a font family, and within this font family we can add any number of properties and we can call them whatever we want. So it makes sense that the body font is going to be under the property body, and then we want to specify the body font, and this is referenced as an array, and we just want to add Roboto Slab in there. And if we save this now, Tailwind will build out a class for us that we can use, and it will be called font body. So to demonstrate this then, with the Intellisense, the Tailwind Intellisense plugin installed or extension installed in VS Code, for the body tag in our index.html, let's add a class and let's go control space, start typing font, and we can see here we have font body and the font family is Roboto Slab. So obviously we want font body, but to demonstrate this, I'm going to just copy the font body and add font body 2. It's going to be exactly the same Roboto Slab, but I just want to show you in index.html now, if we go font dash, we can see we've got font body 2, exactly the same thing. So the Tailwind CLI is building out our classes, and obviously it's being referenced in this output.css, and we're being able to view these generated class names from the Tailwind Intellisense extension for VS Code. So obviously we want font body, and then let's actually take a look in the browser then. I'm going to open with live server, the index.html, and there we go. We can see we have Roboto Slab, we have our hello world, and we're off to a good start. So back in our code then, if we take a look at the completed project, the entire background for this page, I don't know if you noticed, but it goes from a very light gray to a slightly darker gray here. And the gradient is from top left to bottom right. So let's go ahead and add that then for our body. We want to add a BG gradient of to bottom right. So BG gradient to BR means BG background gradient to bottom right. And to reference the top left color, we can go from, and I want a slate 50, and the to color is going to be to stone 300. So we can see we've got the color here as well as part of the Intellisense, which is really cool. So let's take a look in the browser now then. If we refresh, obviously this has been repeated for our background because the body is only that specific height there. But as we start building out the page, we're going to see that it's going to extend the full width or the full height of the page. So let's make a start then on our layout. So we can see we've got a bit of a constrained layout here. We have a max width set for our layout, so it's not spanning the entire width of our screen. It is constrained to a specific width and it's centrally aligned. So we want to do exactly the same here. We want to create a div, and within this div, we want to give it a class of max w, which stands for max width. And you can see on the left-hand side here, all the different max widths that are available to us. So we want max width screen large and a margin of auto on the left and right, which will centrally align it. So for margin left and right, we can target the MX class name, which is the X axis. If we wanted to target margin top and bottom, we'd use the MY class name, which is the Y axis. However, we want MX auto, which will give us let's take a look in the Intellisense again, a margin left auto, a margin right auto. Then let's put our hello world in there, and let's take a look in the browser. And there we go, we've got our hello world centrally aligned and constrained. So now let's create our Mad Bro logo. Let's go back to our code, and instead of this hello world, we still want the H1, and instead of this hello world, let's remove that text in there. We want the text to be slightly larger, so we can see from the default index.html, we had text 3XL, but we want text 4XL. We want a font bold, but we don't want it underlined. So within the H1 then, let's add a span, and we're going to give this a class of background slate 300. We want it rounded full, which will give a border radius of a pill type effect. So it will give this type of effect here, so it's nicely rounded all the way around. We want a border white, and we want a border width of 8. So this will give, border -8 will give us a border width of 8 pixels. So within this span then, let's add 2 new spans. The first one will contain the word mad, and the second one will contain the word bro. The first one, let's give it a class of text pink 500. So this will give a text color of this nice deep pink. And the bro will give a text slate of 700. So it's going to be a kind of dark gray. Let's take a look in the browser, and it's looking pretty good, but we need to add some margins and padding. So we want to first of all add a margin top. So let's go MT for margin top. Let's give it a margin top of 4. Let's take a look now in the browser, and there we go. We've spaced it from the top a little bit. Now let's give the actual text some padding. So we want to give the padding top and bottom of a lower value than the padding left and right. So we want the padding Y first, so padding on the Y-axis, PY. Let's give it PY2, and padding on the X-axis, so PX, which is left and right, let's give it a padding of 4. So there we go, we've got some nice padding there. Let's add a little bit of extra margin top because it's hidden up there again. So there we go, we're just bringing it down so it's actually fully visible on the screen. So now then, let's create our categories layout. So before we do that, this background color is annoying me slightly. What we can do is, on the body class, we can add a min height on the body class. So if we go min H, we can go screen. So it'll give a min height of 100 viewport height. So min H screen on the body tag. And there we go. That cleans that up a lot nicer now. So we're not having that repeated background. So from here then, let's underneath this first div here, let's create another div. And we want this section to be display flex. So we just need to add the flex class. We want it to wrap. So we can add the flex wrap class. And we want a gap between each flex item of 2, so which will be 8 pixels. So we take a look at the completed project. We can see we've got this nice gap here between our images. And obviously we've got our flex wrap. So this sunglasses is being wrapped down underneath these top 3 items here. And it will be exactly the same situation when we reduce the screen size, when all of these items stack. This is due to flex wrap. So in our code then, let's add the first item, and the first div here is going to be the containing div, and it's going to contain the background image. So first of all, I'm going to add a background pink of 500 just so we can see it on the screen. And within this, I'm going to add another div. So this div is going to be the label, and the first item will be shoes, or the first category will be shoes. So this containing div then, we want it to be flex also, and we want to centrally align this shoes label within, if we take a look at the completed project, we want to centrally align it vertically and horizontally within this containing div. So to do that, all we need to do is add a class to the shoes, and we want to add a margin of auto. So mAuto will give a margin of auto all the way around. Let's also give this a background of black, and let's give it a rounded of large. Let's give it a padding all round of 2, and we want to give it a text color of white. So text white will give that. So we'll add in the text white class. Let's take a look in the browser then. And it looks like our label and our container is on the far left there, and it's not actually in our container that we set for the center of the screen. That is because we need to move this div into the div where we have the max screen width. Underneath the H1 then, that's where we can place our grid for our categories. So let's take a look in the browser now, and there we go. We have some overlap here, and that is because this is a span and it's a display in line. So if we change this to a div, or we can add an inline block class, which will display inline block for this span. If we take a look now, there we go. We can see that we don't have that overlap issue, but we also want to add a margin bottom for this H1. So we have some nice spacing between the logo and the categories grid. So we can just go MB for margin bottom, and let's also add a margin bottom of 6, which we can see here is 24 pixels. Take a look in the browser, and there we go. So back in our code then, let's make sure that this first flex item spans the available width it's got. So we want to give it a flex 1, and we want to give it a fixed height. So to give a fixed height, or a height that we want to actually specify, we can use any of these classes, and that's absolutely fine. From Tailwind CSS, we can use any of these classes, H all the way to 96 by the looks of it. And we also have some other more specific classes, so h2.5 for example. We also have fractions, so we've got h1/6, we have a third as well, we have a half, we've got a quarter, so it'll give a height of 25%. However, we want to specify a particular value. We want to specify that this height has 300 pixels. So to do that is really easy. In Tailwind CSS, we just go h dash, open up a set of square brackets, and just type in the unit that we need. So we want 300 pixels, and it's as easy as that. So Tailwind will generate this class for us and give the class a height property of 300 pixels. So if we take a look in the browser, there we go, we can see this pink square here has a height of 300 pixels. If we take a look at the generated class name, we can see h dash 300 pixels in square brackets, and there we go, here's the generated class name with a height of 300 pixels. So from here, before we add the background image, let's go ahead and increase the font size for our categories label. So back in the code then, let's increase the font size for this shoes label. We want to go text LG, and actually LG might be a little bit too small. Let's see what other classes we have. Let's go text 4XL, and let's give the categories label, make sure that the categories label is all uppercase. So instead of hard coding it as uppercase here, let's do that with CSS, and we can use the uppercase class name from Tailwind. So let's take a look in the browser now, and there we go, that's looking a lot nicer. From here then, let's go ahead and add the images. So the images are going to be part of the repo that I'm going to leave a link to in the description below. So you can download the images yourself to use as part of this tutorial. I've already copied them and pasted them into my project right now, so they'll magically appear in my project once I flip back to Visual Studio Code. So back in VS Code then, we can see now I've got a source and images directory. Within the images directory, I've got categories and products. So we want to use the categories directory, and then instead of adding this BG Pink 500, we want to add a background image to this particular div. So to do that, let's remove the pink 500, and just like what we did with the height here of specifying a specific value, we're going to open up a set of square brackets. Now within the square brackets, we want to specify the URL of our particular image that we want to render for the background image for this div. So we want to go URL, and in quotes here, we want to specify source/images/categories/shoes.jpg. Let's hit save in this and take a look in the browser, and there we go. We don't have the pink background anymore. We are actually rendering the shoes background, but the background image is very large and it's way too big for the container that it's being rendered in. So we want to make sure that the background image is of position cover. So all that means is the background image will fit as neatly as it can and cover the entire container that it's being rendered for, being the smallest possible size it can be as well. So there'll be no white space and we'll see the full image within the container. So back in the code then, we can add BG cover, so that'll give a background size cover, and we also want to give it a BG of center. So this will centrally align our image within the container. And there we go. Back in the browser, we can see our shoes category images being rendered for our shoes. So the next one we want to render is the hats and t-shirts. So we're just going to copy and paste exactly what we've got for the shoes. Let's copy our shoes div. Let's paste it twice. So we've got shoes, we've got hats, and we've got t-shirts. So let's take a look in the browser and see what we've got. So there we go, we've got our shoes, hats, and t-shirts. Let's update the background images. So for the t-shirts, we want to render the t-shirts.jpg. So we've got t-shirts, and for the hats, we want to render hats. And let's go ahead and render the last one as well. We also want to render the sunglasses. So let's go sunglasses in here. And instead of t-shirts, let's go sunglasses.jpg. Take a look in the browser now, and there we go, we've got our 4 categories. However, we want to make sure that these are responsive and not just 4 in a line like here. So we want to make sure that we have 3 on the top, and sunglasses is gonna span the entire width, just like what we've got in the completed project we can see here. So back in our code then, what we want to do is make sure that our flex container has a flex wrap, which we do have, so that's great. But we want to make sure that, first of all, we're going to create the mobile styles or the small screen styles. So for the small screen styles, each category is stacked on top of each other. and it's 100% width. So there we go, we can see they're all stacked on top of each other, spanning the full width of its container. So let's go ahead and implement that first then. Back in our code, we just want to add a basis of full for each of our categories. So basis full for the hats, for the t-shirts, and for the sunglasses. Let's take a look now and see what we have in the browser. And there we go, we've got our nicely stacked categories. So now then we can target medium screen sizes and above. So when this is the completed project now, when we increase the screen size at the medium breakpoint, that's the point where we have these 3 columns, and obviously the sunglasses just remains the same. So we just need to add a single class to the shoes, hats, and t-shirts, and we're going to target the medium screen size. So in Tailwind, if we want to target a particular breakpoint, we just use the 2-letter allocation for that breakpoint. So MD is for medium, SM for small, LG for large, etc., etc. So we want to target medium screen sizes, and we just add a colon, and then we can add any Tailwind CSS class after this colon, and it will target specifically for this breakpoint and above. So we just want to target the MD basis, and we want to add a specific value here, and we want to add 30%. Now you may be thinking, well, surely we want to add 33% or a third because we have 3 columns. So 30%, so 3 columns at 30% each adds up to 90%. It doesn't add up to 100%. However, we also have this grid gap. And unfortunately, if we add a 33%, I'm going to show you actually. So if we add a 33.3%, let's go ahead and add this so I can just demonstrate to you real quick what's going to happen. So now if we take a look here, because we've got the grid gap added onto the 33.3%, it no longer adds up to 100% because it's going to be over 100% of the container width, because we have 33.33% times 3, which is 99.99 whatever percent, plus the however many pixels we've got as the grid gap. So unfortunately, it adds the grid gap into the width or the basis that we specify, which isn't ideal, but to get around that, we just need to change this to 30%. So what will happen here is then each column is going to be initially 30% width, but it's going to be able to fill that little extra bit for each column. So each of those 3 columns span the full width in total of its container. So if that sounds confusing, don't worry. It's going to make sense when you see it now. So we've got 30%, 30%. So that's shoes, hats, and t-shirts. MD basis 30%. So this is our project here. So initially this at flex basis 30% is going to probably end around somewhere here, each of these 3 columns. However, because there's extra space in the container, so it would have ended here for each of our 3 columns, then each column is going to add that little bit extra width. So all these 3 columns fill the 100% width of its container. So that's the little workaround we can use when using gap with different widths in Flexbox. So now if we reduce the screen size down, we can see for small screen sizes exactly what we had before. All our categories are stacked. So from here then, let's move on to our featured products. So if we take a look at the completed project, the featured products is going to use a grid rather than Flexbox. And we're also going to add this really cool animation, or transition I should say. This really cool transition. It's a little bit unnecessary, but I wanted to add some transitions into this tutorial as well. So let's go ahead then and add, first of all, let's add this featured products title back in our code. We want to render it underneath this flexbox here. So let's find the ending div there. And we want to add an H2 with featured products. Let's add a class of text center, text 3XL to give it a larger font size and centrally aligned text. Let's give it a PY of 6, so padding on the y-axis of 6, which is 24 pixels, a font of bold, and a margin bottom of 4. So let's save this, take a look, and make sure our featured products label is rendered, and it is. So let's go ahead then and create that grid. So we're going to add all the classes that we need for this grid right now, rather than as we go along. So the first class we need then is grid. We want grid cols to be 1, because remember we're targeting the smallest screen sizes first. So if we look at the completed project, the smallest screen size has 1 column per row. So then when we go to medium screen sizes, we have 2 columns per row, and large screen sizes, 3 columns per row. So let's go ahead then and target the medium screen size, and we want grid cols to be 2. And actually it's not the medium, we want to target the small breakpoint. So it's small breakpoints and above. So this is targeting small screen sizes. When we add the SM allocation, then it's at the small breakpoint and above, so i.e. medium screen sizes. And then for large screen sizes, or the medium breakpoint and above, we want grid cols of 3. And let's give it a margin bottom of 8 and a gap of 2. So let's save this and let's go ahead then and add our first product. So let's give it a padding first of all. Let's give it a padding all round of 2, a background of white, and a rounded of medium. Then we want to go and add the product image. So we're not going to use a background image for this. We're actually going to use an image tag. So the source is going to be source images products p1.jpg, and we want to add a class of a specific height. So we want the height to be something like height 52. So this is going to be 208 pixels, which is fine for what we need. So we'll have a height of 52, but we want the image to behave the same as the background image in the sense that it will fill the entire container, or the image will fill the entire dimensions that we specified for the image tag. So we're not having any different sized images in our products. They're all going to have a height of 52 and they're all going to span 100% width, but they're going to maintain their aspect ratio and they're going to fill the available space. So let's give it a width of full, which will be a width of 100%. And then to accomplish the containing the available space, for an image tag, we just need to set the object to cover. So object cover will set an object fit of cover, and it will behave very similarly to how we've utilized the BG cover for the background images. So let's hit save on this and take a look in the browser just to make sure what we're doing is all looking good. And there we go, we've got our first product. From here then, what we want to do is add our data for the product. So we've got the product title, product description, the price, and the view item button. So let's first of all start with the product title. Let's add all this in a containing div. So this containing div will have a class of text center because all the data items we just pointed out are all centrally aligned. So we want the text to be center, and let's give a margin on the y-axis of 2. So margin top and bottom of 2, which will be 8 pixels. So let's go ahead and add the product title then. And actually, instead of a div, let's render the product title in a strong tag. So we're just going to call it plain white t-shirt. We want to make sure that our class or our strong tag has a font of bold. Then underneath the strong tag, let's add a p tag, and this will be the product description. So I'm just going to add a simple product description here, and the class will be, we want a slightly lighter gray or a lighter color for our text for the product description. So let's give it a text slate of 500. Then underneath the description, we want the price. So let's go from $9.99, and the class, we want the price label to be slightly bigger text than the title and description because we want it to be a bit more emphasized or have a bit more emphasis on the price compared to the rest of the data. So let's give it a font of bold, a text of large, a class name of italic, so we'll have a font style of italic, and a margin top and bottom of 2. So before we go on to the view product button, let's take a look to see what we've got so far. And this is looking really good. We've got our title, our description, and our price. So the last thing we need to do now then is add our view product button. So back in our code then, underneath our price, let's add a button, and the button text will be view item. Let's add a class of background black, text white, font bold, text large, cursor pointer, so people using our site know that they can actually click on this button. Let's give it a rounded of medium. Let's give it a padding all round of 2. And before we add any transitions or anything, let's save this and take a look, see what we've got. So there we go, we've got our view item button. All we need to do now is add a transition where we change the color and increase the size of the button slightly. So back in our code then, exactly like what we've been doing before, when we target screen sizes, for example, we can use this syntax to also target states, for example, a hover state. Let's add a hover, and when we target the hover state, we want the background to be, let's give it a background slate of 700, for example, and we want to increase the size of the button as well. So we want to add another hover state, and we want scale to be 110%. So it's going to be setting a scale of 1.1. So it'll just increase our button size by 10%. So let's hit save on this and take a look in the browser now. And the background color's working, but the scale isn't. And looking at the code here, the scale didn't add the 110. So we want scale-110. Let's take a look now, and there we go. But we want this to be a nice easing transition. So again, that's really simple to do. Back in our code, let's add a class of transition all. And it's as simple as that. If we take a look in the browser now and hover over, we've got a nice transition for our view item button. Let's go ahead and copy all these products. So how many products do we have? We've got 8 products. I'm gonna copy all these then. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we should have 8 products there. I'm not gonna bother changing the product images because it's gonna be a bit of a waste of time. But now we can see we've got 8 products. If we reduce the screen size, we can see it goes to 2 columns per row. And again, for small screen sizes, we've got 1 column per row. We've got our nice transition and hover effect button. And we're using CSS Grid for the featured products, CSS Flex for the categories, and fully responsive with various different colors, all using Tailwind CSS. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my channel for similar content. And if you want to know how to create a similar layout to this, but just using vanilla CSS, so it's not using Tailwind CSS, we're just using vanilla CSS and creating all the classes from scratch, then I have a tutorial on that as well. So make sure you check the link in the card at the top here to check out that video as well. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.